Beyond Reason Radio.
So, did the Federal Reserve cave to President Trump? Did they blink? And the reason they blinked was because Trump kept criticizing them and criticizing the Fed Reserve Chairman, who, of course, was appointed by President Trump. I have a lot of interesting takes on that. Plus Mueller. What is he up to? All of a sudden, it's kind of funny where it seems like it's going to be a little bit of a slower news cycle, a little bit of a slower news week. And when that happens, it's like Mueller's like, well, it's slow news week. Let's get somebody charged.
Sounds like somebody else we know who wants to change the subject from time to time.
Exactly right. Yeah, I wonder who that person is. But I find that fascinating because it was kind of a little bit of a slower news week. You had the caravan, but that was kind of not as big in the news this week. And all of a sudden, Mueller's like, oh, we got this on Corsi and Manafort. They're lying to the FBI. And then Cohen pleads guilty to lying to the Senate. So very interesting stuff. I have a lot to say on that as well. And I want to talk a little bit about global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it now. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason, the voice of truth in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 9 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio 93.1 WFLA and, of course, the iHeart Radio app. If you miss any of the show, you can catch the show anywhere podcasts are available. And, of course, you heard his voice just a second ago. We have Mr. Tom Benson, who is producing as well. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing fine. The common denominator with Mueller seems to be, besides all the fact of all these things that are happening, is that it's going to wind down in about 2 weeks. That's what I keep hearing.
You know, I was hearing that before today. But after today, I'm hearing the opposite.
Oh.
Which is very interesting. I've heard some commentary, like you said, that it's winding down, that it's about to wrap up. But then I'm hearing a little bit of a different take on that. But I'm going to get into the big picture when it comes to the whole Mueller investigation. But before we get to that, yesterday on the show, if you missed the show, shame on you, go listen to the podcast. I talked about the role of the presidency. And I criticized Trump a little bit because Trump had been basically bashing General Motors and bashing the CEO of General Motors because they're looking at their future market and they're trying to decide what to do. And they're probably going to lay off some employees and close some plants because those plants make sedans and smaller cars, which are just not selling. That's the reality of the marketplace. More people are buying SUVs and crossovers and trucks, especially in the United States. Plus, in the future, you're going to have autonomous vehicles, and that's going to change everything as we know it. So I said, it's really not the role of the president to get involved in that. It's not the role of a president to criticize an individual business and basically tell them how to do business, because that's what Trump was doing. He was saying, you better keep that plant open and you better make a better car there if that one isn't selling. That's basically what Trump was saying. Trump was telling a business how to run its business. I was asking the big picture question, is this really something a president should do? That being said, the other question that's come up in the past couple weeks, is you have President Trump criticizing the Federal Reserve. Really not happy with what the Federal Reserve has been doing under his presidency by raising interest rates, which has hurt the stock market and which some believe could eventually lead to either an economic slowdown, not necessarily a recession, or a recession. And Trump has called him out for it. In fact, I have audio here of President Trump. He's done this many times. He's done it on Twitter as well. He's done it on newspapers. And here's some audio of him saying it just a few days ago. Here it is.
No, I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy. So you could say that, well, that's a lot of safety, actually, and it is a lot of safety, and it gives you a lot of margin. But I think the Fed has gone crazy.
So he says, I mean, he doesn't hold back in that criticism. He says, I think the Fed has gone crazy. Now, just a couple of days ago, he told the Washington Post that not even a little bit happy with my selection of Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman. He said, I think the Fed is a much bigger problem than China. He says, I'm doing deals and I'm not being accommodated by the Fed. They're making a mistake because I have a gut, and my gut tells me more sometimes than anyone else's brain can ever tell me. I mean, that's kind of a weird quote. But other than that, he's criticizing the Fed for raising interest rates, which he believes is slowing down the economy a little bit. Well, then something changed yesterday. Powell blinked. Even, Kramer from that show Mad Money on CSNBC.
Sure. CNBC. Yeah.
Or CNBC. Sorry. I mixed up MSNBC and CNBC in my mind. Jim Cramer said that the Fed blinked and that he sees global slowdown and knows that it could hurt us. And he said this is a very big change on interest rates all of a sudden from Jerome Powell. Now, he won't admit that the president was the reason why maybe the Federal Reserve has blinked. There might be some other reasons. I'm not sure. But basically, he came out yesterday in a very planned statement during at the World Press Club, and he basically said that interest rates are just below neutral, so they might go up a little bit, and then that's it, which is different than what he was saying before, that basically they were going to keep raising it for the foreseeable future. Very little increments, but they were going to keep raising it, and the stock market was tanking on the news of that. Well, when that news came out yesterday, the stock market boomed. The stock market went up because that means more money can be lent, which, by the way, is good news for me because, as I was talking about yesterday, I've been looking into maybe buying a new car, and I noticed, new, used, whatever, but I noticed interest rates are a lot higher than they were just a few years ago, and this makes it much harder for me to buy a car, and I would like it if they don't go too much higher.
I read recently that a lot of used cars are at their all-time high in price.
Yep. So bad timing on my part.
So buy a new one. What the heck?
This is a whole different topic, but I almost did because the new one was almost as cheap as the used one, but it was just a little bit.
As Ocasio-Cortez would say, just buy it. Just spend the money.
No, she would say the government should pay for it.
Well, okay.
Cars for everyone.
They get my vote.
By the way, I had a bad experience at a car dealership that I'm not going to get into detail, but I thought the days of high-pressure car salesmen were over. No, they are not over. There are some really big dirtbags out there.
What they do, take your car keys and wouldn't give them back?
I mean, almost.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's almost what happened because they had to, value my trade. So he's keeping my car keys, and then he's basically not letting me go because I'm like, look, I need a day to think about this. This is a little bit more than I thought I was going to pay. And then he tells me, but I'm in the business of now. It's like, what?
Well, good for you, pal.
Thanks. I don't really care what you're in, and frankly,
would this be a named car dealer that we would recognize?
I don't know if you'd recognize it. It was a big one. I'm not going to mention it because I'm not that guy. But
just wondering.
But it really did. It bothered me. I didn't go back because I was really upset. They were giving me a decent deal, but it was just a little bit more than was in my price range.
Mm-hmm.
And he wouldn't say no. He wouldn't let me go. He wouldn't let me leave. Anyway, when talking about the Federal Reserve, we're going back, and this all has to do with interest rates. Here's my thought on all of this. I criticized Trump yesterday for calling out an individual business. I don't think that's his role. A lot of people think it's also not the president's role to criticize the Fed. I disagree. I actually totally support President Trump calling out the Federal Reserve, criticizing the Federal Reserve, saying what they're doing is wrong. It never made any sense to me that the Federal Reserve, that the President of the United States appoints the Fed chairman, and then they're just independent and we just don't do anything. Congress, the president, no, they're totally independent. This is basically an institution that was created by the federal government, put in under a constitutional amendment, the chairmen are appointed by the federal government. The Federal Reserve directs our money supply and totally works with the Treasury, which is a part of our government. The idea that all of a sudden people in our government cannot criticize the Fed or look into what the Fed's doing never made any sense to me. I don't understand it. I know there's a tradition that you don't talk about the Fed. I think it's wrong because it's basically a government institution. It is. We're trying to pretend that it's independent and it's not, and it tries to run that way, but it is, and it has so much power over our economy, does it not? I mean, the Federal Reserve makes one decision. All they have to do is say what decision they might make, and it could tank the stock market or boom the stock market. It has to do with our money supply, the value of our dollar, our national debt. The Federal Reserve is making huge decisions, and then we're not supposed to talk about it. They're independent. They're above us all. I totally agree with a lot of people in the Senate and a lot of people in Congress that we need to audit the Fed, or that Congress needs to have some more oversight over this. It can't be that the president just appoints them and that's it. When you have an institution that has that much power and is directly involved with the federal government in many ways, I don't see a problem with Trump criticizing him. Trump appointed the guy. He appointed the guy and then he's not allowed to talk about it? That makes no sense to me. So in terms of the theme of the role of the president or the power of the president, I criticized him yesterday, but today I think it's totally fine that the president can criticize the Fed and what they're doing and talk about it and disagree with what they're doing. And I think really we need to audit the Fed, or we need to have a little bit more oversight of what the Fed is doing. It never made any sense to me that they had that much power and yet they're an independent institution that, we're going to do quantitative easing, but you can't say anything about it, government. Well, it's our money supply. It's the government's job to regulate currency and to be involved in the money supply, and we can't have any say in it? I don't know. That just doesn't make sense to me. I know there are intellectuals out there that will disagree with me. They say they understand monetary policy, and I understand the argument as well that the reason why it's independent is it's supposed to be different, outside of political motivations. But I just don't buy it because the Federal Reserve has made a lot of bad decisions in the past because it's run by people as well. So the idea that because it's independent, it's free from making bad decisions is just not true. They're open to criticism just like any other institution, in my opinion. And the President of the United States appointed the Fed chairman. He has a right to criticize him when he doesn't like what the Fed chairman is doing. Do you agree or disagree with me? 407-916-5400. You can text to 23680 where standard message and data rates apply. Mueller. What is he up to? There's some big news when it comes to the Mueller investigation and where all of this is going. And I'll play some voices of reason on this as well. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'll be right back.
If you like Beyond Reason Radio, well, make sure to show it by liking the Facebook page at facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
All right, so Mueller, what is he up to? Well, he basically has pled guilty in connection with the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. It pertains to testimony Cohen gave to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Cohen pled guilty one count of criminal information. He gave testimony to the committee that minimized the extent and duration of efforts made by the Trump organization on the Moscow project in order to downplay Donald Trump's connections to Russia. Now, what's really interesting about this is, remember when Cohen's offices were raided and everything? It had nothing to do with the Mueller thing. Mueller found this, but handed it off to someone else. And Mueller said, well, this is separate. And everyone said, this is separate. And then I remember we had attorney Jeff Kaufman on the morning show, and he said, no, this isn't separate. You know exactly what they're doing. It's just a reason to get him in there and squeeze him. And that's basically what's happened here. But I want to think about the big picture of all of this, because what's happened recently? Now they're calling Manafort lying, saying he's lying to investigators. You have Jerome Corsi, who is lying. They say he is lying to investigators, although he says he is not. You have other people that apparently they say are lying to investigators.
If all these people are lying, why believe they're telling the truth when they talk?
Well, that's a good point, and that's another thing. It hurts the credibility of these witnesses. But what I noticed, and what other people have noticed, and they're right, is there still is no evidence of criminal collusion or criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. Out of all of this stuff, there still is not evidence of the original reason that the special counsel was appointed in the first place, which was to find evidence of Russian meddling in the election and to find evidence of Trump and his campaign involved in some kind of collusion with the Russians. Even with this guilty plea, it doesn't make Trump look good. It doesn't make the people around him look good, but there still is no real evidence of collusion. Now, the latest thing that came out last week was you had what I just stole a brain fart. You had Jerome Corsi, and the other guy who were saying basically that they were meeting with Julian Assange, and that because they were meeting with Julian Assange, they were able to work with the Trump campaign after that. Roger Stone. Yeah, Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi. I don't know why I just blanked out on his name for a second. They were apparently meeting with Assange. That's what some people were accusing, even though they're denying it. And basically saying, oh, well, they colluded with WikiLeaks to put out stuff and put out dirt on Hillary Clinton. Here's the problem with that. Even if Roger Stone and Corsi were colluding with WikiLeaks, that still is not a crime. That's not a crime. The only way it would be a crime is if Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi were actively involved with the Russians to hack into the emails. There was no evidence that they were involved in the hacking. The only evidence is that maybe they were talking with WikiLeaks, which is nefarious, but is not a crime. So where's the crime? That's the question. Where is the collusion? That's the question. There's all this kind of stuff all around, but they still haven't got to the center of it. This thing's been going on for 2 years. How long is this going to go on until we get an answer? Until we see the evidence? Maybe it's out there, but I would like to actually see it. What you have, Tom Benson? You have the answer, I think.
Well, there are some people who say that as long as Trump is president, there'll be an investigation.
Yeah. Well, even if the Mueller investigation ends, there'll be another investigation by Congress and all of that. But I wanted to play I've been talking about this, and I'm not the only one who's saying this. Alan Dershowitz was on Fox News earlier today, and he was basically making the same point about the Mueller investigation, that they still don't have evidence of actual collusion with the Russians. Here it is.
What's happening is the special prosecutor is making all of his cases based on false statements. It's interesting. In other parts of the world, you can't even prosecute people for that. But practically the entire series of indictments grows out of false statements rather than any substantive charges. Because, for example, hypothetically, if they were building buildings or planning to build buildings in Russia, surely that wouldn't be a crime. But lying about it might be a crime. So we're seeing many of these cases being built around false statements.
So all the cases that are basically being built in this right now are just false statement. They still don't have any active collusion or criminal conspiracy with Trump himself or the Trump campaign dealing with the Russians. So they're trying to put out an image that maybe isn't criminal, but kind of makes the Trump administration look bad. It's politics. Most of this has been about politics from the beginning. It's to hurt Trump politically, not to actually get after the truth. Now, Alan Dershowitz also makes the point that this actually shows a weakness out of the Mueller investigation. Here it is.
The weakness of Mueller's substantive findings are suggested by the fact that he has to resort to false statement prosecutions, which really shows that he didn't start with very much, that the very fact that he's conducting an investigation has created these crimes. These are not crimes that had been committed prior to his appointment. They're crimes that were committed as the result of his appointment. And that, raises some questions about the role of special prosecutors in creating crimes or creating opportunities for crimes to be committed. In the end, I don't think Mueller is going to come up with very much in terms of criminal conduct that existed before he was appointed. And that's quite shocking.
Think about that for a second. Let that sink in for a second. He's basically saying that most of these crimes, now Manafort had some criminal stuff that went on before the investigation, but most of the crimes that are going on now, and with a lot of people surrounding Trump, are the result of the investigation being started, not happening before the investigation. So the crimes would never have been committed if the investigation never happened. Now, there is always the question, I will admit, there is always the question on why are these people lying? Now, there are many reasons to lie or misremember or whatever. Mostly political reasons. That's why all this is happening, is for political reasons. But I found that very interesting. When you give someone, a special counsel, so much power as they're giving Mueller, he's basically looking to find crimes, and the act of doing this investigation is creating crimes, and we're still not to the original intent of this investigation, which was to find collusion between Trump and Russia.
It's like a biased news story.
Yeah.
You're writing a news story based on a premise, and you search out facts or comments from people or words that will meet that premise.
Yeah, exactly right. But it's even worse than that, because if the news story never happened, none of the lies or none of that would ever have happened.
Well, that never happens. We always get the truth.
And in terms of the point, another voice of reason on this, National Review writer, and he's on Fox News a lot and other places a lot, Andrew McCarthy, been writing about this a lot. He pointed this out as well on his podcast, The McCarthy Report, that even though the campaigns, both campaigns on both sides, including the Clinton campaign, were into some nefarious stuff, that's not illegal. What is being done on both sides were not illegal or criminal. They might not look good, but that's what happens in campaigns all the time nowadays. And I think he makes a good point. This is what he said.
It seems like they're turning the Trump campaign activities, which is just politics as we now practice it, into a crime. And the same thing was going on the other side, and nobody even wants to look into it. This is what these campaigns do. I think it's reprehensible to be dealing with these foreign sources of information. And if somebody wanted to make that into a crime and they could figure out a way to do it consistent with the First Amendment, I'd be all for it. But, currently it's not a crime.
So there you go. They both are basically making the point, yeah, there's all this stuff in the edges, but where's the actual crime of collusion? Where's the actual crime that was supposed to start this special counsel in the first place? I still haven't seen it. Nobody has seen it. And this has been going on for 2 years now. If it's there, maybe it is there. I don't know. But if it's there, I think we deserve to know where it is by now. 407-916-5400. You can text to 23680, where standard message and data rates apply. So, there was a big-time climate change report that came out this week. And it was basically, we're all going to die in hellfire and all that. And it's going to be really bad. And we're all going to be poor because of it as well. So is this fear-mongering? I'm sure you know where I'm going to go with this, but we'll talk about that next. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We will be right back.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime. Your safe space for conservative thought, not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
So there was a new national climate assessment that was released last week, and it basically shows we're all going to die. Did you know that? Did you know that, Tom Menzen? Your rating? We're all going to die?
I heard that. But
Yes.
at the end of this century, things are really supposed to get bad. But guess what? I won't be here.
You don't care. You'll already be dead.
That's right.
So there was a lot of different things that came out of this report.
Well, this report supposedly was something that Congress stipulated. So that's why it turned out to be a government report.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, whatever. But this is one thing that it came out with that I found fascinating. It says by the year 2100, inaction on climate change could result as much as 10% drop in the U.S. gross domestic product. By 2100. Now, the fact that they're trying to predict what the gross domestic product is going to be in 82 years should already raise alarm bells for you. Can you imagine a report coming out in 1918 that was predicting the gross domestic product in the year 2000?
Let's take that premise a little bit further. They can't predict what the climate's going to be in 10 days, let alone
Right.
82 years.
And not only that, but the reason why they came up with a lot of this, the study, which was funded in part by climate warrior Tom Steyer, who might run for president.
Good.
It calculates the cost by assuming that the world will be 15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer by 2100. 15 degrees. This is way more than most are predicting, even the IPCC or whatever, the International Panel on Climate Change. This is, fear-mongering at its best. It's unrealistic. I'm reading here from a great piece from the National Review by Nicholas Loris that's just outlining. I would recommend you all go read it. But it talks about how most of what has put in this thing were basically the worst case scenarios. Like, if you put in all of the possible worst case scenarios that you could on climate change models and put it into one report, that is what's coming out of this. That is what's coming out of this. And it's completely unrealistic. It says the National Climate Assessment insists that climate change has already taken a heavy toll and things will only get worse. Global worsening, it says as worsened heat waves and wildfires, it claims, and yada, yada, yada. It says, but last year's National Climate Assessment on Extreme Weather tells a different story. There were no increases in drought, no increases in the frequency of magnitude of floods, no trend in the frequency or intensity of hurricanes, and low confidence to a detectable human climate change contribution to the western United States based on existing studies. And there's a ton of facts out on this right now. That there's all these different increases in worse weather, that hurricanes are getting worse. The fact is, the evidence just does not bore that out. Now, I'm going to get more into the whole wildfire thing in a sec, because we had the awful wildfires in California. And a lot of this was blamed on climate change, of course, conveniently. Fire, global warming. It just seems it's a visual that they can use to promote the agenda. But before I get to that, I want to get to the big picture when it comes to climate change. The reason why I have always been pretty skeptical of man-made climate change, and I've said this before, but it just seems to me two things. One, it's the perfect theory when you think about it. You're talking about an invisible gas, millions of different variables, and basically using things that happen all the time anyway. So everything proves it's true. So every time there's a flood, every time there's a hurricane, every time there's a fire, every time there's a snowstorm, or every time there's nothing and it's just like a little bit warmer than usual, a little bit colder than usual, all of these things prove that there's climate change, that there's global warming. When I start looking at that, it seems too convenient to me. Because when you call it climate change, no longer global warming, it's just everything that proves it. So what would not prove it? I guess the only thing that would not prove it is if the climate was getting colder over a certain period of time, because we are in a little bit of a warming period. I'm not saying there isn't a bit of a warming period. I'm just skeptical that it's all being done by man. The other reason I'm always skeptical of climate change is because it seems like all of the so-called solutions to stop climate change are basically more government, more socialism, more redistribution of wealth, more taxes, and less capitalism, less free markets, less entrepreneurship. I mean, think about it. Think about it. Everything that we have to stop. So every time you look at the climate change, what we have to do right now, a carbon tax, which would hurt the economy. We have to get rid of our energy resources, which obviously would hurt the economy. We have to create some new kind of government organization that controls all of this. Oh, of course, it's never the opposite. All of these different things. Capitalism. We have to get rid of capitalism. There are people on the left today that say capitalism is destroying the planet and we have to stop it. How convenient that a socialist was able to find some kind of theory that basically, hey, look at this. Now they can actually say, and they say it with a straight face, they can actually say that capitalism, that socialism will save the planet, and we have to destroy capitalism or you're all going to die. Oh, well, that's convenient. That's always been what has made me very skeptical of this. And as Rush always says, imagine if all of a sudden things started getting really cold, and all of a sudden we were in a global cooling epidemic.
Well, that was the big prediction back in the 70s by Time magazine.
Yes, it was. They're in the age of Thomas Jefferson and Noah Webster had a debate over climate change in the 1800s. I kid you not. Look it up. It's actually true. This whole debate of man affecting the climate's been going on for hundreds of years. But if just imagine, when Rush brings this point, I always think it's a good point. Imagine if all of a sudden we were getting colder and we had to get hotter, and we believed that the way to get hotter was to put more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Do you honestly think all these people on the left will be saying what we need is more oil? What we need is a more coal industry, more coal, because it would be good for the planet, because it would put carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and it would warm everything up? Do you actually think that would be happening?
You're dreaming.
Or they would say we need more capitalism? That all these people on the left would all of a sudden change their mind. We need more capitalism. We need more oil. We need less trees. No, of course they wouldn't be saying that. That's what I'm saying. So much of this is political. There might be a warming trend. There might be some contribution to warming by man. But what has happened since the 70s and 80s, really the late 80s? And I've been hearing global warming my entire life. Although when I was a kid, it used to be the ozone layer. The ozone layer was going away. I don't hear that anymore. I guess we fixed it. I don't know.
We got rid of the aerosol cans. Now we got the spray things.
Oh, okay. So that just cured everything?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. But I don't hear that. But I've been hearing global warming my entire life. And it's heated up because we've had some weather events. But there is no evidence that there are more intense hurricanes, that there are more hurricanes. There's no evidence that there are more wildfires. There's no evidence that there's more tornadoes. There's just the evidence is very sketchy that it's creating worse, storms. Now, one person who's a voice of reason on this, and I want you to get the audio ready for me, Tom Benson, if you can. Mark Levin made this same point. He has a radio show. Everybody knows Mark Levin. He made the same point as well, that I basically agree with him. That really, it just seems like this is more of an attack on capitalism than anything else. Here's what he said.
If you take a look at my book, Plunder and Deceit, I explain how this movement got hatched in the 1970s and the early 1980s. These are Marxists in Europe. They call themselves degrowthers. That's what they call themselves. It's an attack on capitalism. Naomi Wolf, another left-wing kook, but she writes a lot, and she's read a lot by the left. She already said, look, the environment and climate change, they are necessary to kill capitalism, in so many words. And then you have these Republicans. Oh, yeah. Do they ever defend capitalism?
So there we go. I agree with them. Every time you look at a lot of this stuff, most of it is just them saying that, oh, well, we got to get rid of capitalism now. Well, that's convenient. Well, yeah, it's going to destroy the planet. Capitalism's destroying the planet, and you're all going to die, so we have to get rid of it. Oh, okay. I mean, come on. 407-916-5400. You can text to 23680 where standard message and data rates apply. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on, what happened with the California wildfires, and can Trump get his wall? If we have time, we'll talk about that. It's 8:47 here on Beyond Reason Radio.
You know what's beyond reason? Yaffee is now on YouTube. Go to YouTube now and just search Beyond Reason Radio. The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
Yes, we talk faith, culture, and politics, and some people say that I'm just a glutton for punishment because those are the most controversial things you can talk about, but hey, that's what we do here on Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. So we had those terrible wildfires that happened in California, the worst, some of the worst in the history of California. We still don't know how many people total were killed by them. There's still people missing. It's just an awful, awful story. But, of course, this was used once again to bring up climate change. In fact, Governor Jerry Brown, in a press conference while this was happening, said this.
Managing all the forests in every way we can does not stop climate change. And those who deny that are definitely contributing to the tragedies that we're now witnessing and will continue to witness in the coming years.
All right, so basically blaming it on climate change. But it seems like more and more evidence is coming out that most of what is happening in California is not because of climate change, but it's because of mismanagement of the forests. A lot of it by the federal government, frankly, but by California as well. In fact, here's a story from the New York Times. Yes. An op-ed in the New York Times.
Wow.
This is what the headline says. It says, to help prevent the next big wildfire, let the forest burn. That's right. They're basically saying that right now there are more trees in California, and a lot of these places in California there were before the fires. But there are a lot more trees in these places in California than there were maybe 100 years ago. And that what's happening is that they've basically been all these laws passed that have made it harder to manage the forests. So the fact is there has been really no increase in wildfires in California, but they have found that the wildfires are more intense. So the fact that the wildfires are more intense goes along with what they're saying here. It says the solution, it says Trump got in a lot of hot water because he basically blamed mismanagement. A lot of people disagreed with him on that. But here from the New York Times article, it said much of California's forest land is overgrown, partly because of government regulations implemented in 1910, which mandated stamping out wildfires as soon as possible. These policies were revised around the 1970s to allow some fires to naturally burn their course, but much of the West has struggled to do so. Basically, the point is that what they do is they try to stamp out the wildfires immediately instead of letting them burn. So there are a lot more trees in California than there were 100 years ago. So even though the amount of wildfires have not increased, the intensity of wildfires has increased, and it all has to do with mismanagement of the forests, not necessarily because of climate change. Of course, I always heard that trees were a good thing, that we should protect all the trees, that we should have more trees. But now they're saying that there are too many trees, and that's what's causing the fires. So it just doesn't seem like you can ever win. I think we should go back to paper bags, I guess. I don't know. I used to hear...
Oh, no.
I used to hear those are bad. Now I hear plastic bags are bad, so we have to go back to paper. I don't know what's...
They want everybody to carry canvas bags back and forth from their home to the supermarket.
So people can forget to wash them, and then we spread disease.
Disease and germs, right?
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. Even the Wall Street Journal, in their editorial page, pointed out and agreed with Trump on this, saying out of 57% of California's forest land is owned by the federal government, while most of the rest is private land regulated by the state. Nearly 130 million trees died in California between 2010 and 2017 due to drought and a bark beetle infestation. Dense forests put this at greater risk for parasitic infection and enabled fires to spread faster. When the dead trees fall, they add more combustible fuel. So what happened is they weren't managing it right. They had a beetle infestation, which killed a lot of the trees, and that has made the fires more intense. That has made the fires more extreme. It says, numerous laws over the past 50 years, including the Endangered Species Act and National Environmental Policy Act, have hampered tree management and forest management. So Trump was criticized for a lot of what he said, but he was actually making a really good point. What they need to do is get rid of some of their regulations, and that'll help a lot of this. It's not just climate change, because the amount of wildfires has not increased. Believe it or not, the amount of wildfires has not increased. The intensity has in the past few years, but it seems like there is an explanation for that. And once again, it was a lot of the environmentalists before who wanted to pass these laws that made it harder to manage the forests. And because they did that, now we have more intense fires in California. So there's one other thing I wanted to get to before I ended the show. I thought this was really interesting. There is a possibility of a government shutdown coming because Trump is threatening to shut down the government over funding for the wall. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about the wall lately because of the caravan. The caravan's been a big issue, people seeking asylum. You seem to have a lot more people coming up from Central America. Here's the thing I'm noticing. Some on the left are actually coming out and saying maybe we do need a wall. This is from Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, another liberal. I know, on the New York Times. What he said, this is the headline. We need a high wall with a big gate. So he disagrees with Trump with the amount of immigrants we let in, but he's basically saying that the Democrats, what they should do is compromise with Trump and help him build the wall, but also get some kind of reform to the immigration and asylum policies, which I think would be the best solution if the Democrats are willing to compromise. And if Trump is willing to compromise a little bit on it, maybe it's possible. But I just found it really interesting that I'm finding more and more people on the left. This is not the first article I've said on this show of something similar that are basically saying, hey, you know what? Why don't we give Trump his wall? Maybe there's an opportunity for this. I don't know. It seems like the Democrats are never going to actually try to compromise here. And maybe Trump's not going to ever try to compromise either. Just I've noticed this trend more and more that it's like, give Trump the wall and maybe we can get amnesty for the dreamers or something. So very interesting. All right, I appreciate you all listening to the show tonight. If you miss any of the show, you can catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available or go to BeyondReasonRadio.com. And, well, I'll catch you guys all next time.